Hi, I'm Dave, and this is Dave's Weird Project. In this episode, I'm painting up a miniature for my wife that turned out to be a lot of fun. Let's take a look. My wife, who has been incredibly supportive of this whole YouTube thing, this crazy idea I had, recently asked for me to paint up some minis for her. One of the ones she picked out was this cool ant dude. It turns out it's from Stonehaven Miniatures. I'll make sure Terry puts a link down in the bottom there. But he's just so cool. He had a couple voids in his toes during casting, so I'm using some green stuff to just fill those in. And once they cured, I cut them down and put some shape back into them, some grooves to kind of match the pattern on his toe. He is a fairly large gentleman of the woodland variety, and I was a little concerned that just straight up gluing him to the base might not be enough. So I'm going to pin him to the base, and using my Dremel tool here, I'm drilling out some holes for the pins. There's an easy trick you can do to get the pin holes on your base lined up, and that's basically to put your pins in the model and dab a little bit of white paint or whatever is going to show up on each one, and then just kind of touch that gently to the base. This gives you perfect little markers for where to drill. I decided to paint him off the base, so I did my standard zenithal highlight, first with black, then white from above, and I decided to go the extra mile this time and do some underpainting as I've learned it from Dana Howl. Can't recommend her enough, she is an artist. The basics of this method are, first, you dry brush with a very light color, white or off-white, and you want to do it downward from above, so that you're essentially raising the value of the piece where the light would be striking it the most from above. And then the second step of this process is to come in with a very dark color, maybe a black wash, and go in the cracks and all the underneath edges, anywhere that there would be shadows. And you use this to accentuate those shadows, to deepen them. Now the reasoning behind doing this is that using translucent paints, which acrylic paints are naturally translucent, the more you thin them, the more translucent they get, you will essentially get quote-unquote free highlighting and shading by having done this step. Your colors will go on, and the bright parts will be brighter and the dark parts will be darker, but you didn't have to do any crazy color mixing to make that happen. How successful was this attempt? We'll find out. Now that the underpainting's done, it's time to start blocking in the main colors. And for tree bark, we're gonna go with brown. But my plan is not to just leave him one big block brown with some shadows and highlights. I got some more ideas for him. All of his foliage, we're gonna start with green, obviously. It's leaves and moss and whatnot. But again, we're not just gonna stick with block green and some highlights and shadows. All of his moss and leaves and stuff are really bumpy. I thin my paints typically, but I needed to go a little bit extra this time to get it to go down in there, and I ended up basically kind of stippling it all into place. I put the same green on these vines that he's got all over him. I really like the way they drape on him, almost like, I don't know, sashes, bandoliers, like he's a soldier in an army. Just one of the many cool details on this sculpt that I really like. Okay, here's where the bark starts to get really fun and interesting. I did some research on tree bark before I started and decided on the color scheme I wanted. And I was really interested in how, if you look really closely at certain kinds of trees, the bark is cracked, and there are varying shades, often right next to each other. You've got browns, you've got lighter browns, you've also got like reds, and at the edges of the cracks you've got grays. So that's what I tried to do here. I started by mixing up a reddish brown and applied that to just several spots of the bark, always trying to keep within the lines of the various, cracks and edges, so that it looks like, this piece grew out red, was colored red by whatever natural process does that. Then I did this process again with a lighter brown, lighter than the original tone for the whole base coat. And this way I've got 3 different tones spread out all across the piece in the various sort of bark sections. And I think it worked pretty well. The last big step on coloring the bark is to come in with the gray, and I've got this very thin, almost a glaze, and I'm coming in just at the edges of the cracks, the tops and the bottoms of each bark section to make those edges look worn, to make them look old, like he's been through some stuff. It took some time and patience to get where I wanted to get with it, but I feel really good about the result. Okay, it's time to head back to the green side of things. So first I got a darker green out, more almost an olive green, and put that over the vines again to kind of vary the tone a little bit on those and also make them slightly different from the rest of the foliage. I wanted them to sort of stand on their own in terms of the hue. It's probably a little hard to see on this video, but in person they really do stand out. Next, I wanted to vary the big clumps of foliage a little bit so they aren't all the same uniform green underneath. And so I got a little bit different green out, a little bit brighter, and I did a really heavy dry brush of parts of the foliage, but not all of it. And then I did this again with an even brighter green, not worrying too much about overlap from before, just trying to hit random spots to just vary the hue and the level over the whole thing. And finally, this guy he's older. And so rather than gray hair like a human, he has autumn colors in his foliage. And so I mixed up some orange, more toward red, and dry brushed that carefully, lightly over all of the foliage to hit the edges to make it look like he's starting to get into his autumn years. We're getting into the end game now, and I felt like the bark was missing something. Specifically definition between the splits and cracks. So I mixed up some brown and black wash together and applied that as, I think it's called a pin wash, into those cracks, kind of all over. And it worked okay, but I thought it wasn't defined enough. So after a little bit to dry, I came back at it with just pure black wash. And that really started to make it pop and stand out. I'm really happy with how that part turned out. Similarly, I wanted to add some more depth to the foliage, so I mixed up some black and green wash together and applied that kind of all over the foliage. I really hope I'm saying foliage right. I've said it a lot. He's only got a few other little details. First, there's these strips of cloth or leather or something. I'm not really sure what they're supposed to be, but they're draped over some of his vines. And to complement the brown and green, I wanted to add a little bit of a blue. So I mixed up a kind of a blue-gray and applied that on these little bits. Next we have his eyes, which I also wanted to be blue, kind of a glowing Fremen blue if you've seen Dune. Just sort of like a deep, knowing blue. Luckily these eyes are fairly big and easy to get to and cover. He has these mushrooms on his hip, and for continuity and also for a future project so that it kind of goes with it, I also made them blue. This is the last little blue bit here. Just trying to like keep some color continuity going with we've got the brown, we've got the green, and then we've got these sort of blue little accents. The underside of the mushrooms I did with skeleton bone, and then did a little bit of a touch up on the mushrooms tops again for where some of the skeleton bone got out of hand. And try to also do a little bit of blending with a lighter blue at the edges of the mushrooms. I don't know how well it came out, but I'm happy with it. I'm calling the figure done at that point, and it's time to work on his base. I start with a uniform gray, just kind of all over. I wasn't really sure what the sculpt was going for with the base, so I'm just assuming that he's come to some environment with, you know, cobblestone-like texture, so your basic gray. I tried to vary it up a little bit, painting a little bit more and trying to do a little bit of wet blending with a lighter gray and then adding a little bit of yellow to the gray to vary the tone a little bit. I let that dry overnight and then did a black wash over the whole thing and then just a really quick dry brush with back to just a straight gray. It came out pretty gray, but I think he looks good on it. You know, you're drawn to him, not the base, and that's what I want. I left some putty on so that there would be some bare plastic to glue him down to, and stuck him on with some epoxy, and he's ready for his close-up. For many centuries, he has been a stalwart defender of the forest on Arbor Island. Though his bark is split and his leaves are starting to yellow, he remains vigilant and strong. He is Stan Broccolibeard, and though he is not unkind, he has no patience for frivolous traipsing about in the lands entrusted to him. So if you venture through his ward, show respect, for he and his sovereign, the Mushroom Queen, deserve nothing less. So I gotta say, that miniature was a joy to paint. The details on the bark, the leaves, the way the bark is arranged like armor plates, all the analogs to a big warrior. It was just such a great sculpt and so much fun to put paint on it. I highly recommend that guy. If you can get your hands on one, he's really neat. Real quick, standard pleading. If you enjoyed this, please click the like button and maybe consider subscribing and sharing. And if you want to support the channel directly, there's links down below that Terry makes sure are there. My book on Amazon, affiliate links there where you buy something, I get a little bit of kickback, but you don't pay anything extra. So, lessons learned. The underpainting technique that I learned from Dana Howl turned out to be really useful, I think. Looking over it as the model evolved, I could tell that the darks and the lights were having an impact, and I had to do less, complicated shading after the fact. So I feel like that was really worth the effort, and on models that I really want to stand out, I'm going to do that again. If I'm batch painting, a big squad or something, I'm probably not going to do that. I might still do the regular zenithal, but not the whole 9 yards, because it is a little bit time consuming. I can't really think of anything else. Maybe I'm the master now. So that about does it for now. Hopefully my wife likes it. I sure enjoyed painting it. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If you've got any suggestions for other big minis that are really fun to paint, let me know. I'd like to hear about that. And until next time, take care, everybody.